Marcus had always believed his life was under control. At 42, married and a father to a teenage son, he had built his career in the financial sector and never imagined he would one day be out of work. However, after dedicating 20 years to a major company, he was laid off without warning, leaving him completely disoriented. In an instant, his stability vanished, taking with it his sense of security. The first few months of unemployment were manageable, thanks to the savings he had set aside. But as time passed and job opportunities failed to appear, Marcus began to realize the severity of his situation. Household bills piled up, his son complained about the changes in their lifestyle, and his wife, always patient, now seemed silently worried. The weight of responsibility grew heavier each day. Amidst this turbulence, an old college friend reached out and casually mentioned the growing digital business sector. Marcus had never considered entrepreneurship, but that conversation lingered in his mind. Was it possible to create something of his own? He had no experience in that field, but deep down, he started to wonder if this was his only way out. In the first few months after his layoff, Marcus tried to remain calm, believing that his professional experience would soon secure him another position. However, interviews were scarce, and the few offers he received were for positions far below his previous role. Time passed, and the lack of responses began to erode his confidence, leaving him increasingly anxious and restless. His daily routine at home became a burden. Accustomed to working long hours, Marcus now spent his days sitting on the couch, sending out resumes and waiting for responses that never came. He began to feel useless, a burden within his own home. His wife tried to encourage him, but the atmosphere between them had changed. The financial and emotional strain was becoming unbearable. The family's savings started depleting rapidly. Previously, Marcus had never worried about tracking their monthly expenses in detail, but now, every penny had to be accounted for. Their son's school fees were overdue. The credit card had reached its limit, and family conversations revolved solely around cutting costs. The fear of losing their home became a real possibility. His relationship with Jake, his 14-year-old son, also began to deteriorate. The teenager sensed the tension at home and reacted with defiance. Once close, they now barely spoke. Jake avoided Marcus, spent more time outside, and started questioning every change in their lifestyle. Why can't we go out to dinner anymore? When are you going back to work? Questions that stung more than Marcus could admit. His marriage, which had always been strong, began to suffer under the weight of financial failure. Emily, his wife, tried to be understanding, but the bills wouldn't wait for patience. One day, after an argument about their finances, Marcus saw her crying alone in the kitchen. It shattered him inside. For the first time, he felt truly defeated. The man who was supposed to protect his family was failing them. One night, after receiving yet another job rejection, Marcus sat in his car, parked in front of his house, unable to step inside. He stared at his hands and wondered where he had gone wrong. His identity had always been tied to his job, his professional status, his ability to provide. But now, who was he without all of that? For the first time, he feared he might never feel successful again. The emotional burden started affecting his health. His sleep was erratic, headaches became frequent, and his eating habits were completely unbalanced. He began isolating himself, avoiding even close friends. The shame of being unemployed grew, and Marcus started dodging social gatherings. He dreaded the questions, the pitying looks, the unsolicited advice. His pride prevented him from admitting just how lost he felt. Desperation led him to consider jobs he had never imagined taking. He thought about accepting anything just to ensure a minimal income. But the fear of making the wrong move paralyzed him. He found himself trapped in a vicious cycle. He needed money, but he couldn't accept that his career in finance might be over. He needed to reinvent himself, but he had no idea where to start. Then, he received an unexpected email. A former colleague mentioned an opportunity to invest in the digital market. Marcus had never considered this path before, but at that moment, it seemed like the only real option. The idea of starting from scratch was daunting. But what if this was his only chance to climb out of the hole? For the first time in months, a small spark of curiosity ignited within him. As he pondered his options, a phone call changed everything. A company albeit a smaller one, offered him a job, but at a much lower salary than he was used to. At the same time, he knew he could invest his last savings into building his own business in the digital market. Now, he faced the hardest decision of his life: accept a secure yet unfulfilling job, or take a risk on something uncertain but with the potential to change everything. Marcus stared at the computer screen, looking at the two emails that could completely change the course of his life. On one side, there was the job offer, a salary far below what he was used to, but at least it would provide a steady income for his family. On the other, a risky opportunity, investing his last savings into the digital market and trying to build something of his own. The weight of the decision consumed him. His wife, Emily, didn't pressure him, but it was clear she wanted security. His son, Jake, still avoided discussing the family's future, but Marcus knew the boy felt the impact of every change. He could no longer afford to make mistakes. If he bet on entrepreneurship and failed, they would lose everything. If he accepted the job, he would likely spend years feeling frustrated. During a tense dinner, Emily asked if he had made a decision. Marcus looked away and said he still needed to think. She sighed and simply nodded, respecting his time. But deep down, Marcus knew that time was working against him. The rent was due in a few days. Their savings were nearly depleted, and Jake's school had already sent another notice about the overdue tuition. That night, while everyone was asleep, Marcus went to the living room and pulled out an old notebook where he used to jot down ideas and investment strategies. He flipped through the pages, feeling nostalgic for when his mind was sharp, filled with confidence. He still had knowledge. He still understood the market. But did he still have the courage to reinvent himself? Or was he just clinging to an illusion? He decided to do one last round of research before making any decisions. He spent hours watching videos of entrepreneurs who had started from nothing, reading stories of people who had turned failures into successes. Some of the stories felt far from his reality, but others were eerily similar. For the first time, he felt that maybe he wasn't so alone in this battle. The next day, Marcus set up a coffee meeting with a former colleague from the financial sector who had already transitioned into the digital market. He wanted to understand the real challenges before making any commitments. During the conversation, he heard about the risks, the difficulties, and the initial failures, but also about the freedom, growth, and financial potential. It was an unstable path, but it might be the only way to regain control over his own life. When he returned home, he found Jake playing video games on the couch. His son barely acknowledged him, but before heading upstairs, Marcus broke the silence. "If I told you I was thinking about starting my own business, would you think I was crazy?" The boy paused the game and, for the first time in months, looked directly at his father. "I think it'd be crazy if you kept doing nothing." The response, simple but honest, echoed in Marcus's mind. The clock was nearing midnight when he finally sat back down at his computer. He looked at both emails on the screen, reread each one carefully, and took a deep breath. His mind was still torn between fear and possibility. If he made the wrong decision, he could condemn his family to years of struggle. But if he chose courage, this might be his chance to change everything. With trembling hands, he moved the mouse and hovered over one of the messages. His heart pounded, his mind filled with conflicting thoughts. Even though he had no certainty about what the future held, at that moment, Marcus realized something important. His biggest battle wasn't against the market or the lack of money. It was against his own fears and insecurities. He closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and finally made his decision. With a single click, he chose the path he would take from that moment on. What would happen next? He didn't know yet, but for the first time in a long while, he felt in control of his own destiny. Marcus decided to bet on himself. Instead of accepting a position that wouldn't fulfill him, he invested his last savings into creating an online course on investments and personal finance. At first, he faced difficulties, feeling the weight of uncertainty, but he persevered. With his accumulated experience and dedication, he began attracting students eager to learn how to manage their money more efficiently. The first few months were challenging, but little by little, the results started to appear. He realized that beyond teaching finance, he was helping people avoid the same mistakes that had once led him to despair. That motivated him even more. His wife, once worried, now saw the determination in his eyes that he had lost. His son, Jake, began to respect him again, feeling proud of the father who refused to give up. Over time, the business grew, and Marcus became recognized as an expert in the digital market. More than just regaining financial stability, he rebuilt his confidence and redefined what success truly meant. He learned that a man's true worth isn't in the title he holds, but in his courage to reinvent himself. His previous failure was, in fact, the push he needed toward a life with greater purpose. Today, Marcus shares his journey to inspire others who, like him, once believed they had no way out. He learned that falling is part of the journey, but getting back up is a choice. His message to the world is clear. True success isn't about what you've lost, but about what you choose to build from the ground up. When you stop fearing failure, you realize that the only limit is your own courage.